What are some common ways people get their own stories wrong?
It's a very interesting question that I hadn't really thought of, the ways that people get their story wrong. I would say when it comes to getting your story wrong is you don't have a really clear perception of who you are and where you are. And so when that's out of step and out of alignment, and that usually occurs when there's too much ego or too much fragility. You know, you're on a spectrum, right? So you're either, oh, I can't do that, right? Or, you know, there's a lot of false bravado. So when it gets too extreme in either direction is when the story gets wrong. It gets warped. And what we tell ourselves becomes our beliefs, right? And then those beliefs are the things that keep us stuck. So it's really important to take a look at how much ego do I have in this? You can feel it in your body. Was it Sanford Meisner that said the body is the instrument? I believe it was, the acting coach. Mm-hmm. And excuse me, YouTube world, if I got that wrong, but I believe he was the one that said that, and which is brilliant because I say that to my speakers, you know, and I quote him, and hopefully that's the right one. But you can really feel in your skin when you're in alignment, and when you're in alignment, you are telling your truth, and that truth is short, sweet, and to the point. It doesn't take a lot of words to say, and it has the tone and the beauty and the magic of a church bell. I don't live very far from the San Juan mission, and every hour they ding the bell, right? Wow. And the sound, it's an old, beautiful church bell, and the sound is pure and gorgeous, and that's what truth feels like. You can feel that in your body. There's no resistance. It's when we feel resistance in our body that we're not being true to our story, or who we are, I should say. You know, that's a story we're telling, but it doesn't mean that we're being true to who we are or what we could be. And sometimes things will feel false when we start to try to tell stories in a new way, because we've worn out those steps, right? You've created a groove in the steps. If you've ever been to let's say to the White House, you can see the steps when you go inside and take the tour. There's marble steps and they're all worn, right? There's grooves there. That's what we do when we tell the same story over and over. We create these grooves and they feel comfortable, and you know that they're going to be worn that way. But then when we start to realize that story doesn't fit us anymore, and we take new steps over into the place that's level, all of a sudden it doesn't, well, I'm not used to that. Maybe I'm lying. But eventually it will become true, and you'll know that that's where you want to be, and it will push you, and it will become your new normal, and it will resonate with you that way. But most of the time I find when people are out of alignment with their story and they're not being really true to who they are and what they want to be, then they'll feel it in their bodies.
Have you ever had to have a meeting about that, in terms of you know, meet the person, you find out kind of their line of events and what their agenda is, or you know what their startup is, but then there's just something off about the story, and you have to let them know it's a disconnect, and I'm really sorry. And then of course there'd be resistance, of course, if anybody was told that about their own lives, and then trying to sort of work with them on allowing what you see as their real story to come forward.
Yes, that's very observant. So both in the pitch world, when I work with entrepreneurs, and in the speech writing world, there are, for the entrepreneurs often, it's that they're so early stage they can't see all of the things they need to see yet, right? Because it's an evolution, right? You progress along the way, and your story gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and you fill those holes. You pitch where you are. And then the next pitch will never be the same as the first one, or there'll be elements that are the same, but hopefully you will have grown the company. And so it will have evolved along with you. So it's important as an entrepreneur to continually iterate. But what happens is, because I know the story form so well, those rules that I so resisted have really come in handy, that I can hear when there's something incongruent, right? So when there's this, there's a hole, and I'm saying and I've had, as a result of me grilling the entrepreneur so deeply, they are like, okay, is this lady going to let up on me? But then they will have actually, once they realize that the question I'm asking is just an audience question, that it's not making sense. Your startup that you keep saying you're going to go to this target market, but I don't see it with the product that you have. So when things don't fit together, just from an average person looking at it, right? Because I'm not an expert in their field. That's actually my strength, is I'm not an expert in someone's field. But so that makes me be able to hear even more so when something doesn't fit together. And so what happens is they have to go back to the drawing table and look at why it's not working. And I've had quite a few companies pivot as a result, meaning that they've had to go and revamp their product and the market that they were going toward, so it would be more in alignment. And it's helped them. So that's been a big epiphany, because they were sure that that was the direction that they were supposed to be going in. So it's often, that's just blind spots that they can't see, right? So that becomes very clear to me as the audience. When it comes to my speakers and their own personal stories, that boils down a lot to their relationship to those stories. Are they willing to let go of a story the way that they've been telling it? When Amy came to me, she'd only been speaking to high schools for an hour. So she had tons of time. 8 minutes was a big departure. So we had to get really serious. As I joke with my speakers, it's time to pull out the chainsaw, fire it up and carve, right? But that allows things to rise to the top. So when I sit down with a speaker, let's say you come to me and you say, Barbara, I've got a 10-minute talk. And I say, okay, great. Why don't you give me what you think you want to talk about in 1,300 words? And so you'll write me 1,300 words. And from that, I'll upload it to Google Docs, and then I'll dissect it and I'll write all of these questions and I'll highlight them. And you and I'll sit down for an hour and a half, and we'll go through one by one. And because of that reason of talking on the surface, like I was mentioning, when we communicate, that's how most people write when they're not writers, and even writers do, right? And so I keep going deeper because I'm emotionally demanding, as I tell my speakers. I want to know how you feel, how you felt in that moment, where you were. Let me feel that too. Don't be stingy. And so a lot of times people won't tell me a full story, and I'll say to them, I feel like you're hiding something. And they'll be like, what? How did you know? And because what's not there will tell me what's missing. Omission. It's lying by omission. And so it's not that people are inherently lying, but I can feel something's not right. I feel very, very deeply when people have secrets. It bounces. I don't know what the secret is, but it comes flying off the page at me, right? Or in conversation, because I have to go deep with my speakers, and I'll feel when they're not opening up. Because when you're an open book, it's fluid.
Right. We were just talking about this the other day, David and I, in terms of certain people in interviews are willing to go to certain lengths, and other people only want to present all the things that are positive. They don't ever want to go into struggles that they had, and why certain people sort of fall into that camp, and why others are just like you said, open books, and they're willing to say, I was sleeping on a couch and there was no money in the bank and my life was over. And I think there's something where certain people don't want to tell certain parts of their story because there's a lot of shame behind it. And so, but sometimes those are the things that make you connect to them. They make you connect to a story, whether it's a script and then there's a character that's not telling something. So do you often see with maybe people that are, advanced degrees or whatever, they don't want to go into failure, but sometimes that component of failure is really what's going to just make you connect in the audience in that 8 minutes?
Yeah, I say to my speakers, there is no story without struggle, period. If you don't have a struggle, we can just close the books now and say goodbye because we all had struggle. And I like to go into those more micro moments. So, how I said that I take story and I really make it narrow for my speakers and I consolidate it so it's not a bunch of stories. It's not too big, it's not too high. It is very, very concise so we can go into the story and how it made them feel, which is, again, giving the audience permission to say, oh, that happened to me too, right? And then you're having this connection, because they say that when you feel what you're saying, your brain waves send out something, that's what science says right now, that the audience's brain waves are in sync with yours. But it's a feeling that's then kind of mind control, Obi-Wan Kenobi. But it's deeper than that, and it's a satisfying feeling. But so there's that. There's also when I work with executives sometimes, because there's a narrative that we Americans have, which is the individual, and the individual reigns supreme. That's a lot of why people don't want to talk about their struggles. They just want to talk about all of their triumphs and how great they are and how much they've achieved. It's a reason why there are ghostwriters, and speechwriters are not so different than ghostwriters, right? Most speechwriters do not identify themselves, but I do. I tell my speakers, I'm going to let people know that you're working with a speechwriter because that's what I do. But most speechwriters won't. More and more ghostwriters are starting to put their names on book covers now, but they didn't in the past. And people feel threatened by that. So that, again, if that's an ego issue, and if you feel like you can't tell people that you're working with a speechwriter who helped elevate your story, it's your story in the end, right? But what we speechwriters are here to do, and good storytellers are here to do, as I tell my speakers, I'm here to make you look good, right? I'm here to, and I think also there's an element of fear for people that don't want to talk about struggle. What if I tell it wrong? What if I overshare? What if and so my speakers will tell me a lot of personal details that will never go from the page to the stage. It won't even make the page, right? But it helps me understand their journey and empathize even more deeply with them and connect with them. And that then I filter through it so the audience feels the tension, feels the pain, but they didn't overshare in a way that was like, oh, that was uncomfortable, awkward, right?
Right.
And I think people worry about that, and we put a lot of emphasis on brand these days with all these social media platforms. And I think that it's important to kind of walk that fine line to be able to share, hey, I'm having a bad day, and here's what happened, and that's how we connect. Without the struggle, who cares?
So is that something that you've had to work with certain people on in terms of letting go and allowing certain things that maybe they don't think are as favorable and don't want them out there, but in the bigger scheme of their story, the bigger, picture of it, that you feel is necessary to get audience empathy as well?
My speakers have been pretty good on a spectrum. They've been pretty good at embracing the struggle aspects. At first, especially the ones that tend to be engineers, not all of them. I love my engineer peeps, depending on who they are. One I worked with once that was a doctor and an engineer. Oh. Yes, and so he was having a little bit of problem embracing the struggle. But then once he could step back and look at it, and he was like, "Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I see. Oh, I read this to my wife, and she was like, that's really good. I never knew what you did before." Right? And then all of a sudden now there's an emotional component, because when we can tell a story, especially in a highly expert category, whether that's medicine, mathematics, it doesn't matter what it is. If we can put that story into real world context, We don't need to know the fine point details. You can go and give that PowerPoint presentation to your fellow mathematicians, right? But how do you how do you translate that for mere mortals like myself to understand how what you do has real world implications, and that you struggled to get to that? You just didn't sit down one day and say, oh, I'm going to be a field medalist and become this fabulous mathematician, and this is how I'm going to do it. No, you sucked a lot along the way, and it was painful, and your peers spanked you along the way and, you know, really beat up on you. And still you persevered because you knew that you had something and you had to keep going. You know, it's not easy. So that struggle, to varying degrees, some people totally get it and embrace it, and they're like, oh, yes! And others are like, lukewarm, but they still go along with it because usually somebody higher up has hired me if I'm working with people that are academics. And I will defer. I'll say, well, you know, your boss, the dean, will have said, you need to do it this one. They're like, all right. or you know, whoever the vice chancellor of the school, those kinds of things. I work a lot with the universities, so.